For 3 tours, they saw her as a babysitter on a hill. A diversity checkbox. But as her squad walked into the kill zone she had predicted, her finger found the trigger. Her commanders were about to learn her real name. Corporal Maya Hex Carter felt the grit of the Afghan ridge press into her bones, a familiar ache after 36 hours of near-total stillness. Below her, the valley known to the locals as the Serpent's Maw coiled through the mountains, a treacherous passage of rock and shadow. Her spotter, Private Leo Rook Gallo, a kid barely 20, shifted beside her, the slight scrape of his gear against stone sounding like an avalanche in the oppressive silence. "Anything, Hex?" Rook whispered, his voice tight. He was still green enough to need the reassurance of chatter. Maya didn't answer immediately. Her eye was fused to the optic of her Barrett Maradi, a rifle that felt more like a part of her own body than a tool. She wasn't just looking, she was reading a story the land was telling her. The rock goats that usually grazed on the sparse vegetation near the scree slopes were gone. The lone well in the abandoned village below, usually a hub of morning activity for birds and lizards, was unnervingly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Vultures circled high overhead, patient and black against the bleached blue sky, having replaced the kestrels she'd noted yesterday. This was the story she had tried to tell Lieutenant Caden Chad Bradford yesterday during the mission briefing. She had laid out her reconnaissance data, pointing to the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of a prepared ambush. The fresh boot prints, not from military-issue boots, in illogical patterns. The unnatural arrangement of rocks that could conceal IEDs. The complete absence of civilian life. Bradford, a man whose crisp uniform and perfectly coiffed hair seemed immune to the dust and decay of their forward operating base, had listened with a smile that never reached his eyes. It was a placating, dismissive expression she had seen countless times, from men who saw her rank and her skin color before they ever saw her skill. "Solid observations, Corporal," he'd said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But intel says this valley is clear. Probably just nomads passing through. You just keep your eyes peeled up there. Let the real soldiers on the ground handle the legwork." Real soldiers. The phrase had been a venomous echo in her mind all night. 3 tours. More confirmed kills at over 800 meters than anyone else in the battalion, including the instructors back at Fort Benning. Yet here she was, the support asset, the diversity hire they could point to in reports, perpetually babysitting on a hill. "Sergeant Riley's team is approaching the choke point," Maya murmured to Rook, her voice a low rumble. Alpha Squad, 8 men she'd shared meals and memories with, moved like a segmented caterpillar into the narrowest part of the valley. Riley, a good man who trusted her in a firefight but seemed at a loss for words with her in the mess hall, led the point. You think maybe the lieutenant was right?" Rook asked, his hopefulness a stark contrast to the cold certainty coiling in Maya's gut. "The satellite images tell the brass one story, Rook," she said, her focus absolute, the crosshairs of her scope drifting from one potential enemy firing position to another. "The ground tells its own story. You just have to know the language." And the ground was screaming. Rook adjusted his binoculars, his knuckles white. "Sergeant," he began, his voice dropping to a near-inaudible whisper, the formal title a sign of his mounting fear. "You don't think, it feels too quiet, doesn't it?" Before Maya could answer, the Serpent's Maw opened its jaws and spit fire. The first shot wasn't the thunder of a heavy machine gun, but the sharp, distinct crack of a sniper rifle. It was a sound designed for psychological shock, a declaration of lethal intent. Through her scope, Maya saw a puff of dust explode from a rock inches from Sergeant Riley's head. The sound echoed, multiplying against the canyon walls, and then all hell broke loose. Muzzle flashes erupted from the very positions she had marked on her map, the ones Bradford had dismissed as unlikely threat vectors. A heavy machine gun opened up from a cave system she'd flagged as suspicious, its tracers stitching fiery lines across the valley floor. RPG streaked from a cluster of boulders, their backblast momentarily illuminating the fighters concealed within. Contact! Contact! Ambush, 3 sides. Sergeant Riley's voice roared over the radio, his professional calm shattered by the sudden, overwhelming violence. Alpha Squad scattered, diving for the scant cover offered by the unforgiving terrain. They were caught in a perfectly prepared kill zone, a 3-sided box of death with no viable escape route. Through her optic, Maya watched the scene unfold with a horrifying clarity that felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Corporal Williams, the team's medic, dragged a wounded Private Jackson behind a pitifully small boulder as automatic fire chewed chunks of stone from where they had been moments before. Specialist Torres, the radio man, crumpled to the ground, clutching a shoulder that was instantly soaked in crimson. His communication pack, their only link to the outside world, lay shattered on the rocks beside him. Jesus Christ, where did they all come from? Rook stammered, pressing himself flat against the ridge, his binoculars shaking. Maya's training took over, a cold, logical process that suppressed the surge of adrenaline and fury. Overwatch to Alpha 6, I have eyes on multiple hostiles, she transmitted, her voice cutting through the rising panic on the net. Machine gun nest in the cave at grid 41 SMD 123-456. RPG team moving on your left flank. Sniper in the old watchtower, East Ridge. Alpha 6, you're breaking, static. Riley's reply was devoured by a harsh, electronic buzz. The enemy was jamming them. The realization hit Maya like a physical blow. They were completely cut off. Her intelligence, the vital information that could save them, was dissolving into the electronic fog of war. She was watching her friends get systematically dismantled, and she might as well have been on the moon. She saw the RPG team, 2 fighters, moving with disciplined speed, using a dry creek bed to close in on Alpha's exposed flank. They were coordinating with the machine gunner, who laid down a withering curtain of fire, pinning the patrol in place. It was a textbook execution. Professional. Deadly. Maya tracked the flanking team, her mind a ballistic computer. 850 meters. Wind from the southeast at 5 mph. Moving target. The calculations were automatic, but they were useless. Her rules of engagement were clear: do not fire unless directly fired upon or given explicit clearance. Overwatch, requesting permission to engage hostile threats to Alpha, she repeated, knowing the words were being swallowed by the static. The reply was a garbled shriek of interference. Through her scope, her world narrowed to the ancient stone watchtower on the opposite ridge. She saw the enemy sniper adjust his position. He wasn't targeting the main body of the patrol. He was swinging his rifle towards Doc Williams, who was desperately trying to apply a tourniquet to Jackson's leg. Taking out the medic first was a classic, brutal tactic. It wasn't just about removing a soldier, it was about destroying hope. A new voice, laced with terror, broke through the static. It was Williams. They're flanking us. The RPGs, they're almost on top of us. They were trapped. Isolated. Outgunned. And their babysitter on the hill was their only witness. Time was running out. Maya could see the tactical situation deteriorating with every passing second. The RPG team would be in a perfect firing position in less than a minute. The machine gunner had them pinned. The sniper in the tower was lining up a shot that would kill their medic and seal their fate. The entire patrol would be wiped out in the next 5 minutes. It was a mathematical certainty. Help was not coming. The jamming ensured no one else even knew this was happening. The nearest quick reaction force was 40 minutes away by air, assuming they could even be dispatched. It was just her. Her rifle. And 8 lives hanging by a thread. She keyed the radio one last time. Alpha 6, this is Overwatch. Do you copy? Only static answered. A dead channel for dead men. Lieutenant Bradford's voice echoed in her memory, dripping with smug superiority. Let the real soldiers handle the legwork. She thought of his clean uniform, his dismissive smile, the institutional blindness that had led them directly into this slaughterhouse. He had put them in this grave. He had dismissed her, her expertise, her very existence as a credible soldier. The rules of engagement he represented had failed. The chain of command he embodied was broken. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The frustration that had simmered for 3 tours, the anger at being overlooked, underestimated, and marginalized, crystallized into a single, ice-cold point of clarity. The rules were written by men like Bradford. And men like Bradford were about to get her friends killed. Her mission was to protect Alpha Squad. That was the only rule that mattered now. She watched the sniper in the tower settle his rifle, his aim steady on Doc Williams's back. She saw the medic's frantic movements as he worked on Jackson, oblivious to the death that was about to descend upon him. The sight broke through the last barrier of her professional restraint. This wasn't a tactical problem anymore. It was personal. She turned to Rook, whose face was pale with the shock of their predicament. He was just a kid, caught in a nightmare he couldn't have imagined. Maya's voice was devoid of all emotion. It was the calm at the center of the storm. "Cover me." Rook stared at her, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He saw the shift in her, the transformation from a frustrated observer into something primal and absolute. The woman who had been molded by procedure and protocol was gone. In her place was a predator. He didn't argue. He just nodded, turning his binoculars back to the valley, his hands trembling slightly. Maya Carter, Corporal, United States Army, was no longer support. She was the intervention. And she was about to break every rule to do her job. Maya became one with her rifle. She shifted her body, a minute adjustment of bone and muscle against the unyielding rock, accounting for the wind patterns she had memorized over the past day and a half. Her breathing slowed to a practiced, meditative rhythm. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. With each exhale, a layer of tension, of fury, of doubt, bled out of her, leaving only pure, focused intent. Shot 1, 900 meters. Her scope found the machine gunner. He was a dark shape behind the spitting fire of his PKM, a weathered face, a beard, a finger caressing the trigger. He was the anchor of the ambush, the linchpin holding Alpha Squad in their rocky prison. Maya watched him fire a long burst, then duck behind his cover. He was predictable. Professional fighters developed habits. And habits were vulnerabilities. Range, 902 meters, she calculated internally. Wind, 8 mph, gusting to 10, from my 4 o'clock. Elevation drop, significant. The gunner rose again, exposing his head and torso to send another stream of lead toward the pinned soldiers. Maya's crosshairs were already waiting for him. They settled on the space between his shoulders. Her finger applied gentle, steady pressure to the trigger. There was no jerk, no hesitation. It was a release, like letting go of a breath she'd been holding for years. The Barrett Maradi roared, a single, definitive clap of thunder that momentarily overpowered the lesser chaos below. The recoil was a familiar, solid punch to her shoulder. Before the sound even reached the valley floor, she was already working the bolt, the slick, metallic shink-shink of the action, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round. Through the scope, she saw the machine gun fall silent. The gunner had simply vanished from his position, replaced by a red mist that hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Shot 2, 850 meters. Holy, Rook breathed, but Maya was already moving. The sudden silence from the machine gun had emboldened the RPG team. They broke cover, sprinting across a section of the dry creek bed to get a clear line of sight on Alpha's position. 2 men, one carrying the launcher, the other a bag of rockets. They were a moving target, perpendicular to her, a sliver of a profile against the rocks. A shot of staggering difficulty. A miss would not only give away her position but would also allow them to reach their firing point and obliterate what little cover Alpha had left. Her scope tracked the lead man, the gunner. He was fast, bounding from rock to rock. But she saw the pattern. He would have to cross a 10-foot gap in the creek bed, an open space where erosion had carved away the bank. He would be fully exposed for approximately 1.5 seconds. Maya didn't breathe. Her crosshairs led the target, settling on the empty space where he was about to appear. It was an act of faith, a trust in her own predictive abilities. He burst into the gap, the RPG launcher a deadly appendage on his shoulder. Time seemed to warp, stretching that single second into an eternity. The rifle bucked again. She didn't wait to see the impact. She was already swinging the barrel of her rifle to the east. Shot 3, 1,020 meters. The sniper in the tower. The most dangerous of them all. He had seen the machine gunner go down. He knew there was a new, lethal threat on the field. And he was rushing his shot. He was still aiming for the medic. This was the edge of her weapon's capability, a distance where bullet drop is measured in feet and wind can send around yards off target. The air was thinner here, the thermals rising from the sun-baked valley floor creating invisible currents. Through her scope, she saw him, a lean figure in a faded jacket, his Soviet-era Dragunov rifle steady. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight adjustment of his head as he acquired his target. He was a professional, but he was now the hunted. The world shrank to the circle of her optic. Life and death in a magnified lens. Wind from the southeast. Elevation drop, extreme. Target stationary but partially obscured. The insurgent's finger began to squeeze his trigger. She saw the minute tightening of the knuckle. Maya's own finger moved in perfect concert. She didn't aim at him. She aimed at the point in space where her bullet, after its long, arcing journey, would intersect with his skull. She squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure of a prayer. The third shot echoed across the valley, a judgment from on high. Through the scope, she watched the sniper's rifle tumble from the tower window, followed a moment later by his limp body. Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the serpent's maw. 3 shots, Rook whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of awe and terror. 3 kills. At those ranges. Maya, that's impossible. The silence in the valley was absolute, broken only by the wind whistling over the ridge. Below, the members of Alpha Squad slowly, cautiously, began to emerge from behind their rock shelters, like ghosts materializing from the stone. Through her scope, Maya watched them check on their wounded, their movements efficient but tinged with the disbelief of men who had just been pulled from the brink of death. Overwatch, this is Alpha 6, Sergeant Riley's voice crackled over the radio. The jamming had ceased with the death of the enemy fighters. His voice was steady, but it carried a new tone Maya had never heard from him before, a deep, resonant respect that bordered on reverence. Immediate threats neutralized. We are clear. Copy, Alpha 6, Maya replied, her own voice betraying none of the adrenaline that was still thrumming through her veins. Status on your wounded? Jackson's hit in the shoulder, but Doc says he'll make it. Torres has shrapnel, but he's walking. Hex, Riley paused, and the use of her call sign felt different now, not just a nickname but a title. I don't know how the hell you did that. I don't know how anyone could do that. But you just saved all 8 of our lives. We're prepping for medevac. 20 minutes later, as the medevac helicopter's rotors faded into the distance, a figure appeared, scrambling up the final stretch of the ridge. It was Lieutenant Bradford. His usually immaculate uniform was streaked with dust, his face flushed from the climb. He stood before her, panting, the symbol of authority who had been rendered utterly irrelevant. He stared from Maya to the valley below, his eyes trying to process the impossible geometry of the shots. He looked at the distant watchtower, a mere speck on the horizon, then back at the woman he had dismissed as a babysitter. How, he began, his voice trailing off as he struggled to reconcile the soldier he thought he knew with the marksman who had just performed a miracle. The reports, the ranges, they're saying over 1,000 meters on that last one. Maya was already breaking down her rifle, her movements methodical and precise. She didn't look at him as she spoke. I was watching this valley for 3 days, sir. I knew every wind current, every thermal updraft, every shadow. When you respect the terrain, the impossible becomes manageable. Bradford wasn't satisfied. He needed a quantifiable explanation for something that defied the neat boxes on his performance reports. The instructors at Benning say anything over 800 meters in combat is a 1 in a million shot, Carter. A guess. Luck. Maya finally stopped her work. She slowly rose to her feet, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were flat, holding no trace of the deference he was accustomed to. The 5'7" corporal suddenly seemed to tower over the lieutenant. The instructors at Fort Benning, sir, she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of the cannon fire she had just unleashed, never had 8 lives depending on their marksmanship. The rebuke hung in the thin mountain air, sharp and undeniable. Bradford had the grace to look away, his gaze falling to the dusty toes of his boots. His institutional certainty, his casual prejudice, had been exposed as a fatal liability, saved only by the very person he had devalued. Your after-action report, he said finally, retreating into the safe harbor of bureaucracy. His voice was stiff, formal. I'll need a detailed breakdown. Timestamps, target identification, shot sequence, everything. This is going to generate significant interest at the highest levels. Maya almost smiled. Highest levels. He meant her actions, born of his failure, were now so far outside the norm they would become a legend he would have to explain for the rest of his career. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Maya Hex Carter stood before a class of elite soldiers in a briefing room at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The silver chevrons on her sleeves seemed to gleam under the fluorescent lights. Before her sat the 12 members, men and women of all races, of the first advanced sniper team she had been tasked to lead. Her story, officially sanitized in reports but unofficially known throughout the special operations community as the 3 Echoes of Serpent's Maw, had become a new kind of legend. It was a tale of impossible odds and unbelievable skill. The detailed topographical map of the valley was now a permanent fixture in the school's advanced training wing. 3 small, red X's marked the enemy positions. Beside them, the distances were noted in stark, military precision, 902 m, 850 m, 1020 m. They were no longer just numbers. They were a testament. Maya looked at the eager faces before her, soldiers who saw her not as a checkbox or a support asset, but as an authority, a master of their shared craft. Today, she began, her voice calm and resonant, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had been tested by fire and not found wanting. We're going to talk about the difference between marksmanship and mastery. We're going to discuss how understanding the battlefield on a granular level can turn impossible shots into achievable objectives. She paused, letting her gaze drift over each soldier. And we're going to talk about the greatest tactical advantage you might ever possess, being underestimated. They will put you in a box. They will label you. They will look right through you. Let them. The more they overlook you, the more invisible you become. And when the decisive moment arrives, the one that changes everything, no one will ever see you coming. The soldiers leaned forward, hanging on every word. They knew the legend of the 3 shots that had saved Alpha Squad. But for the first time, they were hearing the lesson behind the legend. Maya Carter knew that the shots she fired that day had done more than save 8 lives. They had shattered a ceiling made of glass and ignorance. They had proven that excellence answers to no preconception, that skill knows no color or gender. And that sometimes, the most profound victories are won by the quiet warrior in the shadows, waiting for the one moment when everything depends on them, and them alone. Maya's story is a powerful testament that true talent cannot be contained by prejudice. What quality do you think is most important when facing impossible odds? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please comment with respect for all service members. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories of courage you've never heard.